Hello, welcome back to Wheel of Time Diaries. I believe this is the 31st episode of the series, and we're starting a new book this time around. Of course, if you've been sticking around on the channel, or if you've been on the channel for this series before, you know that I'm finally beginning Lord of Chaos, book 6 of the series, after a little bit of time off. Earlier this year, in fact, pretty early in the year, relatively speaking, I read The Fires of Heaven. Then it took me a couple of months to get around to reading A New Spring, which I did in just a couple of weeks, and then it's been a couple months since then before I'm starting this book. Overall, my Wheel of Time coverage for 2024 has been rather lacking, all things considered, but worry not, because we are now on the Lord of Chaos train and going to be doing quite a few Wheel of Time books next year. We'll talk about that a little bit closer to the end of this book. For now, I want to just say that after reading for nearly 8 hours over the last couple of weeks, because I read the prologue a couple weeks ago, which took like over 3 hours, and then I read the first 5 chapters over just this past weekend, I'm having a blast with Lord of Chaos. So far, it has been great. I do have a couple critiques regarding the prologue specifically, or at least just kind of comments as far as how I perceive the prologue in comparison to some other stuff within the series, just more technical-ish type of jargon, but we'll get to that in turn. I just want to say, like I said, I've been really enjoying the book, and I'm actually a surprising bit of the way through the book already, about 120 pages read or so over the last couple weeks, and I'm going to have to keep a pace of about 120 pages a week all the way through the end of the book to be able to finish this book around the time that I have the last diary for it scheduled, totaling about 5 diaries for this book, I believe is the plan. I think maybe 6 actually. That might be closer to 6. We'll see how successful I am in that endeavor. I just don't want to take 7 weeks like I did for Fires of Heaven, or 8 weeks like I did for The Shadow Rising. But I think I'm beating around the bush enough. Let me talk about these spoiler-free impressions of what I've read. Prologue, pretty good. I don't think it was actually a great Wheel of Time prologue, at least so far as the prologues in the series so far have been. The prologues of books 1 through 3 and then book 5, because The Shadow Rising did not have a prologue, those 4 prologues were all great, but they had their own style, basically their own thing going on that made them feel like a prologue compared to normal chapters of the book. My critique of this prologue mostly comes down to it not really feeling like a prologue for the most part. The first POV and the last 2 POVs, if you were to take those out of the prologue, scrunch them together, and then put those at the beginning of the book and make that a prologue, that would actually make sense in my mind, and it would actually feel like a normal Wheel of Time prologue. But then you also include with those 3 POVs an extra 20, 25, maybe even 30 pages on top of just regular other POVs that could have been more like a chapter 1 in and of itself if you were to just take the prologue as is and maybe rename it to chapters 1 and 2, kind of the same way that the first 2 chapters of The Shadow Rising where you would have a pretty similar structure as far as introducing most of the major characters and plot lines, as far as, where they exist in this book at this point in time, what they're doing, what they're kind of up to, before getting really deep into the weeds in the actual plot and what Rand as the main character especially is doing. So I'm not sure I fully understood why Jordan decided to make this prologue this way. I understand it a little bit more now that I've read through the first few chapters with Rand's POV and then the first chapter of Matt's POV. But generally speaking, I thought the prologue was good, but I do think it is a little bit overhyped. So that's something that I want to mention, I guess. It's not necessarily to say it was a bad prologue, of course. I don't think that was the case at all. Everything within the prologue was actually great, but I just not entirely sure why it was structured the way it was, being a whole 50 pages in this specific context. I don't feel like it really needed to be that. I think it could have been just those 3 POVs, like I mentioned, the first POV and the last 2 POVs pulled away, made into a prologue, and then the other parts of it been chapter 1, and then move into Rand's POV for, the rest of this introduction. But that's kind of a personal thing. Chapters 1 through 4 were all just Rand POV stuff. Enjoyed what all happened in those pretty great material. In fact, really great material. Generally, I really enjoyed following along what's going on with him, especially as far as his character's developing. And I would say the same thing for the one POV chapter we have from Matt so far, that being chapter 5. Overall, I've really enjoyed what I've read over the last couple weeks as I've started to get back into this book and the series, and I'm on the hype train again. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the actual spoiler discussion for the book and talk about some of the things that happen and some of my impressions of those things specifically. Now, one other thing to note is that my chapter reactions, as far as what I write in some of the Discord servers that I'm part of, what I share with some of my friends while I'm reading the books, is a little bit different, structured a little bit differently in how I write the actual reactions, because I wanted to do a little bit different thing where I actually like noted down most of like the spoilery things that actually happened that I wanted to make note of, so that they'd be here for easy reference for these videos specifically, because at some points while recording Diaries over the last few books, it got to be the case where I would be like looking through certain chapters and being like, okay, well, here's my reaction. Like, how do I parse out what actually happened in this chapter in this block of text that I just wrote here? So this time around, I basically just have like a bullet point list of some of the things that happen in each chapter as I'm reading, to be able to make note of. So starting with the prologue, let me of course talk about the 3 POVs that I've mentioned so far up to this point that I think are like the actual prologue material here. The first one was great. It was the Forsaken Demandred meeting with the Dark One at Shayol Ghul, which is really cool. This scene basically just recapped the end of the Fires of Heaven to some degree, and we got some hints at some other things that are going on, including there being like a specific Mirrodral, a specific Fade that seems to be obviously in league with the Dark One, because that's what the Mirrodrals do, but this one has a name specifically, and apparently has a different type of name than Mirrodrals typically have, which is probably something that's going to be important for later. Demandred and this meeting, I don't remember specifically any of the other material that happens in this meeting besides Demandred basically saying like, this is the stuff that happened at the end of Fires of Heaven, more or less. So that was stuff to kind of like get me back into the world with material that I was already familiar with and that I enjoyed. Otherwise, the other 2 things that were notable about the prologue that weren't like normal POV stuff, like I said, were the last 2 POVs, namely a meeting between Semirij, Graendal, and Demandred. I'm probably pronouncing all these names wrong. Classic KC with Wheel of Time coverage. That's okay. But these are 3 of the remaining Forsaken, plus a Black Aja Aes Sedai named Messiana. I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced on account of having 2 A's in the middle of the name. If it's not Messiana, forgive me, and also forgive me if my accent is messing up my pronunciation and what's coming out my mouth is slightly different than how I'm hearing it in my head. This is stuff that I've struggled with previously in the series. Either way, this meeting between these 3 Forsaken and this one Black Aja seems to be a really important occurrence, particularly where Demandred is concerned when he finally joins the group, revealing the Dark One's plan, which we, the readers, don't get specifically, a device that Robert Jordan has been very keen on doing as far as his villain POVs are concerned. You know, we know that Demandred learned something from the Dark One with the meeting that he just had at the very beginning of the prologue, so that's a fun thing, but we don't know exactly what the details of any of that are. Maybe we'll figure those out later, maybe we'll put things together later, maybe we won't find things out later, and maybe things will get messed up so that it doesn't actually happen that way. Anything is possible. The last POV of the prologue was also pretty memorable because you feature the same Fade that was in the first part of the prologue, when Demandred, meets with the Dark One. 2 previous dead Forsaken are revived and are given the names Osangar and Arengar, reincarnated Forsaken. We're unsure at this point, at least I don't think it was confirmed, who these Forsaken are, revivings of, who they were previously, but they are brought back to life and also told of, some of the information that they basically need immediately, aside from the fact that they still serve the Dark One in being revived by the Dark One. Presumably this is part of the Dark One's plans that Demandred is telling the rest of the group. Who knows? I'm not entirely sure. That's more or less just a guess on my part. But these revived Forsaken are told of Robin's death at the hands of Rand by Balefire. I'm unsure if Balefire is specifically utilized in the prologue, but it's important to know that he's dead and not coming back. And that's what these two revived Forsaken are told. So, pretty cool information to get. I'm very excited about what's going to go on with some of the villain stuff here. I know Wheel of Time gets panned a little bit for having pretty basic one-note villains, and some of them being rather cartoony or basic. Like I said, I already said that word, but that's fine. I'm honestly, up to this point, not having a complaint about that with the series. Even the ones that are a little bit more basic or predictable as far as the trajectories and paths are, haven't been handled very poorly on Robert Jordan's part, so I don't really have any complaints where the villains are concerned. But I'm infinitely more intrigued than I even was before with, two of the Forsaken being revived. That definitely ups some of the stakes a little bit. So, that's stuff worthy of note. But otherwise, the rest of the prologue was mostly just regular main character POVs, stuff happening in various different parts of the world with all the various characters. So in one part of it, you have Nynaeve, Elaine, Swan, Leanne, and Moghedien. All that kind of stuff going on. Nynaeve and Elaine basically trying to heal the stilling that occurred with Swan and Leanne. And then, of course, Moghedien being imprisoned with them. Trying to learn more about what stilling is and if there's a way to fix that, or learning more about Forsaken as well, with Moghedien being there. There's just studies going on amongst this group of Aes Sedai, and I guess former Aes Sedai, because that's the situation that Swan and Leanne are in. But I enjoyed that scene. In fact, Nynaeve has been one of my favorite characters basically since I changed my mind on her partway through The Great Hunt, so I'm really looking forward to see what happens with her in this book. Don't really have a full opinion yet of the rest. I know I really like Swan and Leanne from what's it called, New Spring. Swan especially, I really enjoy her character, so I'm interested to see where she continues to go on account of the stilling, all of that stuff. That'll be really interesting to get more information of. We get another POV from Zareen herself, which was rather surprising. I don't remember if in The Shadow Rising, let alone in The Dragon Reborn, if there was actually a POV chapter from her. So it was interesting for the prologue to contain a POV from her. This POV was actually pretty good, mostly dealing with just Two Rivers, like political affairs, stuff going on specifically because of Perrin being appointed the Lord of the Two Rivers, and Zareen as his wife taking over this because Perrin's kind of shirking his duty to some extent. Pretty entertaining. But Perrin determines that he has to leave the Two Rivers and go find and help Rand. That's what he's going to do. That's what he decides at the end of this scene in the prologue. I had no issues with Zareen in this prologue as well until the last paragraph or two, when some of her more irksome qualities started to scrape out just a little bit. But a lot of this comes just from Perrin's interactions with her. Perrin constantly wants to protect her, and so he wants to go do stuff, where she's not, so that she's not in danger because of him, or rather on account of his doings. But Zareen refuses to, be treated this way. So there's always a combative dynamic between these two that just kind of annoys me a little bit. So I'm not entirely sure how that's going to continue to go through the rest of this book, but this scene in the prologue was pretty good. I enjoyed the political affairs. I thought it was pretty entertaining getting a lot of this stuff from the Two Rivers, seeing some of the Two Rivers characters and how the lore dynamic of Perrin within this setting has affected things a little bit. That's been fun. There was another POV of a meeting between the Shido, Aiel, and White Tower Aes Sedai. This POV actually probably could have also been pulled out alongside those other POVs to be kind of part of an actual prologue in my mind. Just kind of the way that I'm restructuring the prologue in my brain. It's a personal problem. Forgive me for making these points all the time. But this meeting between the Shaido Aiel specifically and some of the White Tower Aes Sedai, who of course are the ones that usurped Swan, stilled her and Leanne, and basically put Elida into the position of, oh man, Amerlin seat. That's what it's called. It's been a long time not having a ton of Wheel of Time on the brain, so forgive me for forgetting some of these terms. This scene was pretty good. I enjoyed some of the Shaido scheming that was hinted at within this scene, and I also have a lot of questions basically about what both sides intend to do with / about Rand. Of course, we know that because of Elida being the Amerlin seat now and being previously Red Aja, we assume that like she's kind of antagonistic towards Rand and the Dragon Reborn in general, but based off of this scene, we're not entirely sure what her plan, what her intent is going to be with Rand / the Dragon Reborn when the Tower actually decides to do anything about it. So that's something that I'm really keen on learning more about. And we also have absolutely no idea what the Shaido plan to do, except that they're probably antagonistic towards him as well for obvious reasons. So there's that POV. Don't worry, just a few more POVs from the prologue. A couple of these I actually really enjoyed. Actually, that's a lie, only 2 more POVs, one of these a little bit shorter. The next one here is of course of Morgase down in Amadisia, which I don't actually remember for sure how far away from Caemlyn she was able to get during the Fires of Heaven. I don't remember how much of her material was really on the page. I remember one of my very minor complaints about the Fires of Heaven being that I wanted a little bit more from Morgase's POV throughout the book. This was kind of part of the reason, but regardless, in the prologue here, she is in Amadisia trying to get aid from some of the people around, from some of her old political friends, to go back and usurp Gabriel, who of course was Ravin back in Caemlyn. So really ironically, and she learns this in the scene of the book, that in the scene of the prologue specifically, that Ravin, Gabriel, has been killed specifically by Rand's hand. She learns some of this information through Niall or Neil. Actually, someone please tell me, is Commander Neil or Niall? Is which pronunciation is it, unless it's something totally different? The captain of the White Cloaks. I would really like to know which version specifically of the name that is, so that I'm not second guessing myself every time. Either way, the commander of the White Cloaks comes and reveals that Gabriel is dead by Rand's hand to Morgase, offering to help Morgase retake Andor with the White Cloaks. So kind of an odd thing on Niall's part. I'm just going to say Niall for simplicity reasons, for consistency in this video at least. Other Andor men also come to offer Queen Morgase aid when learning that she is here and that she's not actually dead. So there's some interesting political tensions going on here with Morgase, of course, and with her previous kingdom. I'm interested to see where this goes, especially since Rand is currently the one that holds Caemlyn. Really looking forward to seeing what goes on there. The POV then switches really quick at the end of that to be Commander Niall himself, which seems to have his own, which basically just reveals that he has his own scheming going on here in the South, things that he plans to do in regards to the Prophet and what the White Cloaks are actually going to do, and you know, some interesting stuff. I don't remember the exact specifics of this material, but there's definitely some intriguing stuff going on. I liked basically all the POVs of the prologue and all the material that came out of it. So that is more or less the coverage of the prologue itself. Let's go ahead and move on, since I've already been recording for quite a bit, in what happened over the first 5 actual chapters of the book. The first 4 chapters of which shouldn't be too complicated. There's not a whole lot of specific points to make, and the first 4 chapters are all, of course, just Rand in his POV. So getting Rand in his POV in this book, gotta say, Rand is a great character. Like, he's always been a great and interesting character from the very beginning, and obviously he's meant to be the main character for very many different reasons, but there are different times when he takes more forward seat, more of a back seat in the narrative, depending on what's going on, which character he's surrounded in, and depending on what specific points of the plot are taking focus. But in the beginning of this book, you can already tell with these 4 chapters that Rand is going to be a humongous part of this book. And I've heard it said from more than one person, more than once, that this book is great for Rand stuff. I don't know if that necessarily means that it's not great for non-Rand stuff. Who knows? Maybe that's just insecurities cropping up. But regardless, Rand material seems to be the consensus of what is absolutely amazing in this book, and I'm thinking that that is almost certainly true just on account of these first 4 chapters. So in chapter 1, Rand is... It basically opens this portion of the book with Rand training with some unnamed men within Caemlyn. So people... Wait, is this within Caemlyn? I'm pretty sure it's within Caemlyn, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm sorry. You know, basically just a point of Rand continues to train himself despite Lan having left on account of Morgase basically ordering him to... Not Morgase, why did I say Morgase? Moraine ordering Lan to leave at the end of Fires of Heaven before she dies. Rand trains with unnamed men in the beginning of this chapter, in the beginning of the book, basically ostensibly so that he can continue to train and get better. He keeps the name unnamed to himself so that he doesn't form any bond or friendship with them, which is an interesting tactic. Pays double to the people who are able to strike a hit on him despite him fighting multiple people at once. It's to discourage them from holding back because he's, you know, the Dragon Reborn, so that he can actually have, you know, some tough practice. I really enjoyed this practicing. It was pretty fun, really entertaining actually. It reminded me that Jordan is actually pretty good at riding combat when he wants to be, so I enjoyed that scene. Immediately after this little training session, we have Lord Bashir, which I'm just coming to realize is Zareen's father. At least if I'm not mistaken, Zareen's father is here with a bunch of other people from Saldea because they were given leave from the people in Saldea to search out, what's the guy's name? Taim, one of the previous false dragons who's basically lived despite using the power, the male half of the one power for like 15 years or something like that. Lord Bashir is here in Caemlyn with Rand, like kind of in a more tense like agreement with Rand that he'll help, but like there's not super tight feelings there. At least Lord Bashir basically speaks with Rand about trusting Aes Sedai, tells him that Rand will have to trust Aes Sedai at one point, whether from the tower or not, because he's going to need the Aes Sedai to be able to fight the Dark One in the last battle, is basically the argument that Lord Bashir is trying to make to Rand. Rand continues to say that he will not trust Aes Sedai because Rand, that's his issue, but he will instead use the Aes Sedai kind of in a similar way that the Aes Sedai use him, or that Moraine has... He thinks Moraine has used him throughout the series up to this point, and Aes Sedai, who he said he didn't trust until like right before she died, basically. So that was an interesting scene. But their arguments are interrupted by the very Taim false dragon that we just spoke about very briefly, being announced to have arrived at the gate because Rand has made Caemlyn, or at least, you know, wherever he rules, states of amnesty for men who use or can use whatever the one power, because he needs as many people who can fight for him in the last battle as can be. So Taim happens to come probably for this amnesty for Rand, but also it seems just based off his personality, because he kind of wants power, and or at least part of the glory that comes with aiding the Dragon Reborn, because it seems he knows and understands that he's not the Dragon Reborn and that Rand is. So that's an interesting dynamic, but that kind of moves into what actually happens in chapter 2, which is a conversation, a meeting with Taim and Bashir and Rand all at once, where Taim taunts Bashir. Rand diffuses the tension with, you know, basically announcing some of the things that the Forsaken have done that Taim has come nowhere near to doing as far as like crimes against humanity are concerned, where Taim's probably done some pretty bad stuff, but not like Forsaken type of stuff. Rand also mentions specifically within this little tirade, this is why I make note of it, Messiana, which is one of the POVs from the prologue, if you remember. Pretty important to note. I feel like this was specifically included on Jordan's part for a reason, and that this will come up later. So I feel like that's a prediction that I'm actually pretty comfortable making. So that's something that happens in there. But basically, there's an argument with what Taim will do and what Rand wants Taim to do with the power for now. And that is basically convincing Taim to serve him without, Taim really having any say in the matter. Because if not, then like Rand makes threats that like he's going to do something to him, but Rand also knows that like he can't really do that because he needs people who can use the power, especially someone like Taim who has lived with this for a long time, much longer than most men do before going mad. So that is definitely something. Either way, Rand takes Taim through a portal to a farm or somewhere nearby Camelin. It seems like it's probably somewhere pretty close by. I think the chapter makes mention of being just a few miles away, but I'm not entirely sure exactly where this farm is. Maybe we're not supposed to know, where a bunch of other men who have come for Rand's amnesty have been taken. Taim is tasked with testing these men, testing these other boys to see if they are capable of using the power and other similar nonsense, to see if they're capable of using it, see if they are able to touch it, whether they're going to be able to be trained or not, and then of course being able to train them at some point soon in the future. At the very end of the chapter, we also get a reference that Rand plans to return back here to meet with Bashir for a purpose that only he and Mat and Bashir know the meaning of. And this is something that we get a lot of hints about throughout the next couple chapters as well. I'm pretty sure based off of chapter 5 we can kind of make an educated guess on what precisely this is referring to, but overall it's not entirely clear what exactly it's referring to in the first place. But those are the first couple chapters. Basically the next couple chapters are just kind of continuing this thread. 3 specifically is Taim beginning to test some of the men who have come seeking Rand's amnesty. Rand immediately understands how the testing works because previously he did not, which is a sticking point in one of the brief little conversations that Rand and Taim have. So that's pretty important to note. Rand now basically has an idea of how to test men himself for the one power, so I'm sure that's going to be utilized pretty soon. Rand tasked Taim, like I said, with testing and training, teaching all of these boys, first off teaching them how to be able to test others for the power, so that basically it can become a network of people finding as many men who are capable of this as possible, so that Rand can have an army of men being able to use the power, since of course men and women can't test each other or do anything of that kind of stuff where the one power is concerned. Then for chapter 4, Rand goes to Tyr, discusses with the High Lords of Tyr there some of the stuff that are going on. Again, probably some of the stuff related to what Bashir and Mat know about. Further holding off an invasion of Ilion, because Ilion is where the Forsaken Samael still rules until Mat arrives, and this is a real sticking point in the chapter. Rand also talks with some of the Aiel that are around the area about some of the same things, but then he also gets schooled about how he's supposed to be handling Avienda again, which is some entertaining material. I liked the material that was happening with Rand and Avienda in Fires of Heaven, so I'm curious to see what kind of stuff happens in this book as far as that is concerned. And like I said, there are yet more hints about this sort of joke, this sort of plan that Mat and Bashir and Rand all have that only they know the full meaning of. It's not entirely sure what that is, but I think based off of chapter 5 being a Mat POV, we have an idea of sort of what that's supposed to be. Basically, with chapter 5, Mat's POV, great stuff. It starts off with Mat being in a place, I believe, called Mehron, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, it's basically right across the river, just south of Carrion? Yes, just south of Carrion, across the river from Erangel, it seems like. So Erangel seems to be like right out of the coast of Andor, so just kind of in this like weird free float state that's in between like Tyr and Carrion and Andor and stuff. It seems the armies have been shacked up here following the Fires of Heaven for a little while, awaiting more or less seemingly Rand's word on when Mat is supposed to continue to move. But that's a little bit of material we'll touch on in just a minute, because first, Mat is in a tavern here in Mehron. He's in a tavern called the Golden Stag, and some of the material in the Golden Stag in this chapter, amazing. Like, some of my favorite stuff is definitely turning Matt into a character that I'm really wanting to learn more about, that I'm already really liking more than I did in previous books, and I did mostly like him in previous books already. Matt dances with a girl, a server of the tavern named Betsy. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce the name, even though it ends in an E instead of a Y. I don't understand why her name would be Bets, but you know, Robert Jordan makes some weird decisions as far as names are concerned. Either way, Matt dances with this girl, and one of the reasons why I bring this up is because through the dancing, Matt kind of like remembers from some of his past lives. This is something that, a weird expansion of his character that has come from the Fires of Heaven, and already in the beginning of this book, is that the same way that Rand has the voice of, what's his bucket? Lou's there, and that's the name, in his head, basically talking to him, and like these personalities are kind of like molding together and kind of becoming the same. There's some interesting stuff going on with that. I should also note that like all of the internal stuff that's happening with Rand throughout all of these chapters, basically arguing and fighting with Lews Therin, all the internal conflict that's happening with his character has been really great. Similar thing with Matt here, except instead of like having the voice of other people in his head, it's like he's remembering past lives, maybe lives that he quote unquote lived from previous ages, just having memories from people of different battles of different times. While dancing with this tavern girl, he remembers and enacts a dance that his memory has from a different life, which also brings up other memories from this past life. I don't remember the specific memories themselves, but basically flashing through some of Matt's quote-unquote experiences through the ages over the course of this dance was something that Robert Jordan did really well. I loved reading this section. I'm not entirely sure how important like these specific memories brought up themselves are, but I really enjoyed the material nonetheless. Also, during the dance, Matt recalls from the previous night, presumably Rand's suddenly coming into his room through a portal. So basically, you know, him right after being in Tyr, Rand, I guess, right after being in Tyr, Rand goes to meet with Matt, or maybe these are happening on the same day. So I guess it was the day before all of the stuff that we just covered through chapters 1 through 4. I'm not entirely sure the timeline. Either way, Rand comes through into Matt's room at some point in Mayron? I forget. Either way, Rand comes through a portal into Matt's room one of these nights in this town where they're just kind of shacked up, and basically gives Matt the go-ahead to start marching south down towards Tyr and Ilion, but without, you know, notice, basically, to do it like all of a sudden. So that is what Matt basically does. So he recalls this after having the dance with Betsy. He goes and does rounds of the town, kind of doing his normal daily thing. He's told of and observes a sea folk ship for some reason this far north on the river, unloading at Erangel, which is something that is interesting to note. I wonder what's going to go on there. Matt goes and does more rounds, returns to the tavern, and dances late into the night and the morning, and the whole entire warband leaves just a few hours after, you know, bedtime, essentially, after all the dancing and shenanigans. Very early in the morning at first dawn, the whole warband essentially leaves very suddenly because Matt gives the command to do so, and so now they're all marching south, seemingly to trick Samael in Ilion that Rand is doing something that he is not as far as invading Ilion is concerned. So like I said, maybe this is what it is that Rand and Matt and Bashir kind of have planned, just a war plan, an invasion plan of Ilion, something to do with what they're going to do about Samael. I'm not entirely sure if this is the case, but I'm getting the impression that this is the case. We still don't have full confirmation. Maybe it'll come soon. Not 100% sure on that front. But I really enjoyed this chapter. Matt was really great through all this, and the kind of hints at what it's gonna maybe do for the future of the book is really great. So yeah, that is basically all of the important points that I'm remembering to bring up for now of the book, about 120 pages in. I forget exactly what percentage that is. It's like 15% or so. if I'm not mistaken. It's a not insignificant portion, especially when as many words are on each page as are here. That's why this video is so long, is because even though it's only 120 pages, there's a lot of actual material that is occurring on the page. Not to mention the fact that the prologue was just really lengthy and had a lot of scenes with a lot of characters doing a lot of stuff, you know, switching back and forth between all those things. But that's basically it of the reading for this week. I'm sure there's probably a couple things, definitely some details that I missed or that I'm not bringing up in the video. That's okay. Over the next 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to try my best to read another 120 pages and make that a pretty consistent thing every weekend until I'm done with the book. So yeah, that is a wrap for the first episode of The Lord of Chaos, Wheel of Time Diary. I believe, like I said, that this was episode 31. So I'm excited to be back for episode 32 next Thursday. Every Thursday is going to be when these diaries come out, all the way through, I believe, Halloween itself. That last Thursday of the month, is planned to be the last diary for this book. So we'll see how successful I am in actually finishing it in that time. But if you watched this video all the way through, thank you very much. I appreciate it. If you've been following along with my Wheel of Time journey overall, I really appreciate you. Or if you haven't checked back on some of my experiences with early books, all of the diaries are still there. The previous 30 episodes are all there for Wheel of Time, for The Eye of the World, Through the Fires of Heaven, plus New Spring there as well. And I'm excited to continue this book and then move on into a little bit more of the series early next year. But like I said, we'll talk about that more in a few weeks' time. For now, that is the end of this video. I don't remember what next Tuesday's video is off the top of my head, but thank you for watching. Once again, I'll be back next Thursday with the next episode of Wheel of Time Diaries. I hope to see you there.